everybody. Welcome to Ask the Pastor. My name is Matt Love. I'm here with Pastor JD Greer. And if you guys are anything like me, you're kind of getting to the end of 2024. You're like, all right, what did I do this year? You're starting to look ahead. What goals do you have? And I know that a lot of people have goals around reading. I have goals around reading that typically I'm really good at hitting all my reading goals. You guys may not believe this, but having a 1-year-old child impacted my number of books read this year pretty heavily. So it wasn't quite as good as I'm used to. But
I always thought that you get up in the middle of the night and you are feeding them or whatever, and then you get to read. Isn't that how it works?
Well, so JD, it's not that I haven't maybe read a number of books. It's that maybe the quality. It's just like me rereading Harry Potter over and over again because my brain can't take in new information. But
you're not reading Harry Potter to your 1-year-old. That's not the point of it. Okay.
Not yet. Not
so
quite yet.
It might be a little bit young for to really comprehend the nuances of that.
Handle the material. We'll get there someday. But I know a lot of us, myself included, also like kind of think about future, like next year, 2025. What books do I want to read? What are some things that are on my list? And JD, I know that you are definitely a big, love reading books. And we just kind of thought it would be good here kind of at the end of 2024 to maybe give you an opportunity to share some of your favorite books from this last year that maybe could help other people start making their 2025 reading list. So what were some of the best books you read this year?
Yeah, I mean, we do this kind of every year. We put up something on jdgreer.com and this, and it ends up being a really popular, just by the numbers, people, because they're like, I mean, I remember hearing the phrase, there's no thief that's worse than a bad book, because, that they have stolen. So, I'll talk to you a few of the ones, my favorite, that I've read this year, or at least, had an impact. I think what we have planned here, unless time just flies while we're talking, we'll probably need to do this as a part 1 and a part 2. So we'll continue it on next week or whatever.
Yeah, I think the goal was to do a top 10, and I'm not sure if you held to that or not. So I think it might top 10 some
friends and some other random people that just showed up at the party that you didn't invite.
Lots of honorable mentions. So anyway, that's really good. Now,
I'm not a good decider. I'm like, everybody gets a prize. So
real quick, just out of curiosity, JD, do you keep track of how many books you read in a year? And I don't know. Did you track
I actually do. Maybe it comes from a place of pride in my heart. I think it's more, I always get frustrated when people are asking me about great books, and I genuinely can't remember. So I just keep a log of them. It ends up being about 50 to 60 or so. Now, a lot of those are Audible books. Yeah. What a wonderful way to redeem time, whether I'm just, working around the house or driving around. So, but all told, we're not going to go over all 60. I picked out the 10-ish or so that I just enjoyed the most or had the biggest impact on me. So, Matt, one quick caveat I'll throw in just before we go through any of these books is, I'm not sure if there's any book that I've ever read that I thought I agree with 100% of these. So some of these things, in fact, there are times I will read books that I disagree with the primary premise of it. But still, it's strengthening. It's iron. It's sometimes helping me understand thoughts better by seeing people that don't agree with them. So don't take me mentioning the book or even commending the book as a wholesale endorsement of everything it says.
Well,
we don't have the space on this
podcast. There's a phrase that you use at Summit a lot that now Summit staff use a lot, which is eat the fish, spit out the bones. And I feel like that's helpful because it's like we're trying to get the things that are helpful. And there's a lot of books that have these great, are challenging or encouraging or just, to your point, cause us to think in a certain way, even if we ultimately don't agree with everything in there. So that's a helpful caveat before we dive
a couple times I've actually been, read somebody who completely I disagreed with, and I'm like, it helped me understand my own position better.
Yes.
So a lot of this podcast, we don't have space to actually go through in detail and say this is what we disagree with. So that's not the purpose of this.
Well, I think it would be great to start with I know you read in a lot of different categories, but maybe, I don't know, you start wherever you want, but maybe start with some of the, Christian books that maybe impacted you the most this year.
Yeah, why don't we do it this way? I'll, for both parts 1 and part 2, I'll put a little mixture in. I'll put the spiritual books up front. And yeah, I mean, there's some secular books that I just either really enjoy or just have a big impact. I remember hearing a leadership guru years ago say, you'll be exactly the same person you are today 5 years from now. 5 years from now, you'll be the same person you are today, except for the people you meet and the books that you read. So I feel like it's a worthy investment. So let me start with one that I would say hands down is not just one of the best books I've read this year, but one of the best books I've read in my lifetime. It's a book called Bless God and Take Courage, the Judson, Adoniram Judson History and Legacy by an author named Rosalie Hall Hunt. I know that's big praise. I loved Courtney Anderson's biography of Adoniram Judson, one of the most captivating, fascinating missionaries who, many would say launched the mission movement out of America years ago. Deeply impacted by that. Named my son after him. So, I have a lot of personal reasons, but I think even beyond just my personal affection for him, just the legacy, the life that he lived. And I think Rosalie Hall Hunt does a great job. Having read a number of biographies about him, I would say this is one of the best. It's just the writing is good. You never know that looking at the cover. In fact, the president of one of the Judson colleges, there's actually 2 or 3 Judson colleges, one right over here at Southeastern now named Judson College, but one of the Judson colleges, one of the older ones, told me it was the best of the biographies, and I didn't believe him, and I picked it up and looked at the cover and thought, I don't know if I'm going to read this, and then I got about 3 chapters in, and I'm like, he's right. But if you've never done that, pause this podcast. Unfortunately, it's not available on Audible. Get this book. Yeah. And it'll. I remember when my wife, when we were dating, she knew about missions. She loved the Lord, but we actually read. It was a different biography of Adoniram Judson, but it totally wrecked her life in a good way. And so anyway, I just cannot commend that one enough. If you can only read one book this year or for the rest of your life, read Bless God and Take Courage. She even at the end, it's kind of interesting. After she ends Adoniram Judson's life, she then turns into Indiana Jones and does this sleuth work going through tracking all the people that came from him, the converts, where they are, like where their legacy is. Talks about going over to Myanmar, what Burma used to be, or what Burma is called now, and talks about just investigating like lost artifacts. It was pretty awesome.
Man, so, we are starting off with, if you could only read one book for the rest of your life, read this book.
Right. Yeah.
Everything else from here is like, let's just part 1's done. We'll do all the other ones
also
in part 2.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, keep going. What's another one? That's an awesome start.
And I'm gonna put this in the spiritual category, even though this writer kind of goes in both. He writes for the New York Times. It's called How to Know a Person by David Brooks.
Yes,
Matt, I will tell you, this is one of the books that I literally and I never do this. I finished it, and I immediately went back to the beginning.
So JD, this is actually also probably one of my favorite books for this year, and I did something similar, which is I got it on audiobook and listened to about a chapter and a half, and I'm like, this is so good. I bought the book so that I could underline and write stuff down and grab stuff. So helpful.
Yeah, whether you're a pastor trying to know people, how to minister to people, or you're just a friend or a parent, knowing how to love. It's basically how to love a person.
Yes.
And it was just, the insights in it, the empathy that it gave for people. Just, like learning to whether it's the question behind the question or, man, I feel like it grew me in Christ likeness about as much as any book I've read in a while.
That's exactly right. I think there's a ton of ways to apply the things he talks about. But again, like to your point, I think it's a great book if you just want to be a better friend, a better person who interacts with other people. It's so compelling and so helpful. So that's really good.
Yeah, it's now a requirement for anybody who wants to be my friend. I'm like, you have to read this book so that you can love me.
How do you know me? How can you know me better? That's good.
I'll move on. Here's number 3, just to keep it moving. This one will be a little bit more niche, but it's called Marks of a Movement. Yeah. What the church today can learn from the Wesleyan revival, led by, of course, John Wesley, Winfield Bevins, who actually is a guy I've known for a while. Just a fascinating analysis of literally what I would call the OG multiplying disciple-making disciple, churches planting churches movement. And so, Matt, considering what our day jobs are, it's just going back, looking at some of these patterns that God set, what it means to make disciples rather than converts, how to weave multiplication in it. It was just, this is why the Great Awakening happened. And it wasn't just because of great preaching. It was because of these principles that ultimately became Methodism. Yeah. So hey, have you had a chance to read this one?
No. So is this bad form in a podcast? Can I have Amazon open while we record? Because I'm adding this to my cart as we speak. Because as soon as you start talking about the multiplication piece, I'm like, man, I need to read this. So
it was good. It's not nuts and bolts of like what to do today, but it's like this is what they were doing in the 1700s.
Love that.
And this is how it took off.
That's great.
So it was great. Another one I'll mention real quick is Surprised by Doubt, How Disillusionment Can Invite Us into a Deeper Faith by Josh Chatraw, who used to be over here at Southeastern, actually a Raleigh guy, and a guy named Jack Carson. There's a lot of books coming out in the deconstruction movement. I thought this was one of the better ones. It was very sympathetically written. It really kind of drives you back to I think it's the Apostles' Creed. It's that, or the Nicene Creed. It's sort of it uses this house metaphor where we've kind of presented the attic of Christianity as if it's the main floor, and we got to get back to teaching the main floor. It inspired me. I'm hoping in the next year, maybe 2 years, I'd like to do a deconstruction series. And, I'm committed to preaching expositorily, but I thought, actually going through the Apostles' Creed maybe would be something so who knows? But anyway, it was really good. It'd be good if you're trying to counsel, whether it's a college student or high school student in your home. It'd give you a lot of good stuff there. So
that's great. So it is like a little bit more. Is it a little bit more on the practical side of walking with people through that, or more on the theoretical side of how this is working, or a mix of both?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, I feel like they wrote it in a way that you would hand it to, somebody who was but I actually think it's more valuable for those who are ministering to somebody or talking to somebody that would give you some stuff to talk about. So
great.
One more I'll mention here in the spiritual category is an older book by Esau McCaulley called Reading While Black, African American Biblical Interpretation as an Exercise in Hope. And it was there was a lot of things in there that were expressing passages of scripture and pointing out some things in there that, man, I've preached them a dozen times, and I don't know if I've ever quite seen them that way. So there was some challenging to ways that I see and think about things, and it was encouraging and challenging at the same time.
Okay, so JD, those are awesome. I've read a few of those. Those have been really helpful. As much as I hate using this word, the word like, let's get some secular books in there, it just feels like, but kind of like you're saying at the beginning, we can learn from a lot of people and a lot of things, even if they don't agree with us or hold these different things. And so I know for me, reading books by, either it's just biographies or books that are written by non-Christian authors still can be helpful. So we're anything that we're in the quote unquote secular book category that really stuck out to you this year. Yeah.
Well, I actually had a great year this year reading some just fascinating memoirs and some stories of people. So the Rulebreaker, which was the biography of Barbara Walters, that was one Brian Loritz recommended to me. And I was like, are you kidding me? And I got about, I got a few chapters in. I'm like, this is fantastic. I mean, there's a lot about Barbara Walters to admire. There's a lot of things to not admire. But, it's an era of history. Watching, it's everything from how the news works to the struggle of women in certain places and right and wrong ways of dealing with that. It was just fascinating. It was just interesting. Related to that one, or in a similar category, is Walter Isaacson's Elon Musk biography. Talk about just being in the mind of a genius for a while. Love him or hate him, the man is a genuine genius if you define that by incredibly high IQ and doesn't think about any single thing you ever think about. He thinks about it differently. And because of that, he flies, things to the moon and builds electric cars, but or revolutionizes the car market. This is, I realize now he's become very political, but it's just an interesting character study of a fascinating individual. So,
and Walter Isaacson, I feel like, a great biographer. I've read a few of his other biographies he's written. I actually have the Elon Musk one on my shelf, kind of in the to be read in the next year category. But I feel like he does a good job of engaging complex people. His biography of Steve Jobs is so interesting.
Oh, yes.
And Walter Isaacson does not write a biography to either convince you to hate someone or love them. He tries to write a biography about what he sees in the person. So that's interesting.
Yeah, good. Zero Fail was another one. My friend Bruce Frank over at Biltmore recommended this one. It's The Rise and Fall of the Secret Service. Man, talk about a book that will make you admire and be bewildered. In fact, a lot of that stuff that happened when the assassination attempt on Trump, all the stuff that went, like, having just finished this book, Zero Fail, he was like, oh, I can see all this playing out. And, I mean, in fact, I don't want to, there are a couple presidents in recent history who, I mean, after reading this book, I'm like, these guys should potentially be in jail because of the way they endangered the country. It related to things they did with the Secret Service. And that's all I'll say as a teaser. Because the Secret Service is not that old. It really kind of grew up after Abraham Lincoln's assassination. And, of course, Secret Service started as a way of anti-counterfeit money. And then they just kind of slapped it on the president and said, and take care of this guy, too. Yeah. Make sure our quarters are legit. Make sure the president doesn't die. Yeah. But it's if you like White House type of intrigue politics, it's a great one. One more I'll mention, Open, the biography of Andre Agassi. This is another one. I've had some books recommended me this year that I'm like, why would I? Yeah. I know you don't agree with this, Matt, and feel free to roll your eyes, shake your head. I'm not a huge fan of most sports biographies. Yeah. I feel like it's kind of like, whatever. I don't want to start. I don't want to tell you why I'm not but whatever. It's just this one, Andre Agassi. I realize these guys a lot of times we use secondary writers, but it's very reflective and just insightful. His knowledge of his own heart and, how idolatry, and, he opens up talking about how much he hates tennis and how it just became, as if tennis was his servant, it was good. And if it became his master, it just became a tyrant. So it was, I mean, it was one of those, let me sit in the driveway and hope Veronica doesn't notice that the car's home yet. Cause I want to listen to the end of this chapter kind of book.
I didn't read this one, but I have a few friends who would say this was their favorite book this year. So definitely heard about this one a few
Mary
times,
Brooks Shields. I mean, all these things, there's all this old 80s nostalgia. It just came back to me. So, I think we probably, one more I'll mention real quick.
TED Talks. One more. Yeah.
TED Talks. I'm not talking about watching TED Talks. There's a book by the guy Chris Anderson, who's in the leadership of TED Talks. And he just goes over how do you make an unbelievable 10 to 15 minute presentation. And, I do that for a living. I make, public presentations. He's given a lot of examples from TED Talks, and I just learned a lot as a speaker from it. So
that's really good.
Even if you're not a speaker, I think you'd love it.
That's a great start. I mean, like we've already proven that we needed 2 episodes because I think we might have even gone over what we normally would do for 1 episode for the first half of the list. But excited to dive in to part 2 of the book list. So if you're enjoying this, and again, you're like me and you're just furiously adding Amazon things to your cart, come back next week. And as always, subscribe. This is a great time to go ahead and, like, if you've just been kind of listening to a few episodes here or there, like going into 2025, just getting some of these resources and podcasts that you think are going to be helpful for you. If this podcast is one of them, just subscribe so you get it automatically. And you don't have to think about it. It just comes straight to your phone. As always, this episode was produced by JD Greer Ministries, and we'll see you next time on Ask the Pastor.